I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we're continuing our coverage of the events that unfolded this past week in Venezuela, the abduction of Maduro. This time we'll be speaking with Kyle Anzalone, opinion editor at anti-war.com and host of the Conflicts of Interest podcast and the Kyle Anzalone Show. We're going to be talking about a number of subjects, including breaking down how Maduro was abducted and the questions surrounding his capture. Was he sold out by forces within his own government? We don't know, but we will discuss these matters. And also, we'll be delving into the connection of South Florida Republicans and Marco Rubio to what has transpired. Is this part of a play by the Cuban-American exile lobby? Is Venezuela first and then Cuba? Is that what is going on here? We'll be looking into that and much, much more. What does this all mean for the future of both Latin America and also the United States? Find out as we dive deep with Kyle Anzalone. Also, I need to remind you that this show really could use your support, especially as I really get back into the swing of things this new year. Slowed down a bit during the end of the year just to spend time with family. Now I'm back in the saddle, and I really could use your support at patreon.com/parallaxviews. Any amount will help. Once again, patreon.com/parallaxviews. And also, if you can, please consider visiting the website of my one and only sponsor, Mike Swanson of wallstreetwindow.com, where you will get the best trading and financial news. I've actually had listeners make a return on investment from Mike's trading tips. You can sign up for the newsletter at wallstreetwindow.com, and if you sign up now, you can also get a copy of Mike's free ebook, The Two-Fold Formula, the single best trading pattern I have ever used. Really useful stuff, powerful information, great trading tips. Like I said, I've had listeners who've benefited from wallstreetwindow.com, so head on over there and sign up for the newsletter. And if you can, while you're at it, please consider supporting me again on patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, let's get right to it with Kyle Anzalone. Welcome back to Parallax Views, a friend of the show and an opinion editor at antiwar.com, also the host of the Kyle Anzalone Show. How are you doing, Kyle Anzalone?
Doing well. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's been a bit of a crazy past few days. I'm sure it's been wild for you having to cover all of this on your show and also working with anti-war. What do we know about what has transpired? Let us go through the basics here, because I'm just confused. At first, I thought, what, did they decapitate the regime? But then it appears that Maduro has been captured, but his vice president is now president, so it's not a regime change. What is going on?
Well, yeah, there are still a lot of questions, and I guess I will say most of the information we do have about all of this does come from the White House. And so I am sure that Trump's telling of this narrative is leaving out several key factors. And so probably some of the questions that I'll bring up as I retell this will be answered as the truth comes out in the coming days. But on Saturday morning, the U.S. launched a raid. Trump indicated that it involved blacking out Caracas and then striking Venezuelan air defense systems, swooping in with Black Hawk helicopters, and I believe a Delta Force team, along with some FBI members of the FBI hostage rescue team. They go in, they kill what we now know is about 35 Cuban security forces who were there, I think, acting as essentially Maduro's personal bodyguard, and as well as a good number of Venezuelan civilians in the strikes, and then also Venezuelan military personnel. I think the total number of dead in Venezuela is now reported to be 80, although I'm not sure how much we should trust that number. I would suspect it's at least somewhat higher. Apparently, the U.S. forces were able to breach Maduro's mansion, which was on a military base, and get to Maduro and his wife before they were able to seal themselves in a safe room. Now, a couple other just important things here to mention is that Trump and I believe Hegseth also said that the U.S. have built out a version of Maduro's mansion in the United States and was drilling on that for months. And so this was something that they have been looking at for a long period of time if they had been able to construct this mansion with the steel door and then have been drilling on it for months. So this was some time in the works. Now, there is a lot of speculation about because no Americans died in the attack, that you would almost have to imagine that somewhere either some general was bought off or somebody agreed to let their guard down to allow this to happen. It just seems too suspicious that they were able to act so quickly that Maduro and his wife couldn't get out of bed and make it to a safe room in their own house when there's a blackout in Caracas, when there's airstrikes going on, right? I have a lot of questions here. Now, some of those may be answered in the fact that I think as Delcy Rodriguez, Delcy Rodriguez, who was Maduro's vice president, is now the interim president as declared by the Venezuelan Supreme Court. And I guess almost more importantly, Donald Trump said that she was acceptable, at least for now. During his press conference announcing this, he said that Marco Rubio had a discussion with her and that he believes she was going to work with the U.S. on this issue. After that, on Sunday, she did give a fairly defiant statement saying that Venezuela will never be slaves to another country, that she is willing to have a respectable relationship with the United States, but Venezuela will never again be the colony of an empire. Now, I did find in Axios that they had sources from the US government, so this is certainly an official leak, that in the White House, this was being downplayed as her doing what she needed to do to solidify control. Obviously, if she comes out and says that, that Maduro, he really was trafficking drugs and was a real bad person, and he was emptying out our prisons and basically just bats up the narrative that Trump wants to say and say that we're going to allow the Americans to have our natural resources, then there's going to be other power factions in Venezuela who attempt to capitalize on that, kind of seize the Chavez movement that Maduro had been controlling and in front of over the past decade or so. I forget how long Chavez has been dead, for like a decade and a half. I guess it's been a while. So I guess there would be a real battle for that movement, and her endorsing the U.S. takeover would certainly be a problem and open the door for somebody else to try to seize that movement. So it could be that, but then later that day, Trump was speaking with an Atlantic journalist, and he threatened. He said, if she doesn't play ball, we'll do worse to her than what we did to Maduro, which I guess would mean rather than trying to take her, he would just send in the special forces to kill her or blow up her house or something like that. So I don't know. I highly suspect that somewhere there was some complicity within either Venezuela or hell, even with Cuba or some members of his security team, which was heavily Cuban, although so many of them dying would maybe suggest that wasn't the case. But again, just want to open the possibility to say, I don't know. There are a lot of them as to who in Venezuela helped this to happen. I don't think it was just the opposition. I think it had to be portions of the Venezuelan military, which, one thing to point out here, and this was actually in Dennis Kucinich's article on the attack on Venezuela, and it's an important point. Venezuela hasn't been spending money on their military for the past couple of years. I think they had just like a $4 to $5 billion military budget, but when push came to shove, Maduro kind of favored social welfare programs over the military. And, while I do like, even as a libertarian, I would say, well, that's probably a better use. If you can only have one or the other, I would certainly prefer taking from the military industrial complex. But people will point out that that's a very dangerous game to play, that these are very powerful people and they have a
Well,
lot
yeah,
of
you're pissing
weapons.
off the
So
military.
right,
Yeah.
absolutely. So maybe there are those dynamics here at play. I think there's a lot of possibilities. But the last thing I want to note is that Trump, during his address, said, "We're taking over Venezuela. We're going to control Venezuela." He said that Rubio was leading essentially a small council of viceroys that were going to control the country. And maybe most importantly, he said he wasn't afraid to put boots on the ground to get the job done, and he was, kind of open to this taking years to play out.
Um, I want to get back to that, but what do you make of the news that he's sort of thrown the opposition leader Machado under the bus?
Yeah, of maybe the only time I smiled on Saturday when covering the news was when I watched that press conference, and threw the 2025 Nobel Peace winner, Maria Machado, under the bus immediately, right? Like, this woman probably served maybe not like a crucial, but a substantial piece of the propaganda effort to sell people on this war. And as soon as within the hours, right? Like, Maduro gets taken by the United States. She's tweeting out, "I got a government ready to go." She's telling the press, "I'm ready to go." And then Trump speaks, says nothing about her in his address, which I thought was notable itself. But then when he was asked later on by the press, he said, "She's a nice woman," which is his way of saying that I don't like her, and I'm done with her. And she doesn't have the popular support she needs. And Rubio spoke with Rodriguez, and we're looking at working with her. It was hilarious, for somebody who advocated regime change in her country, military action against her country, sanctions against her country, to be tossed aside like a piece of trash. I guess maybe you see the Trump administration trying to learn a little bit from what Bush did in Iraq, where they really believed Ahmed Chalabi and were kind of planning on installing his government once he took over, where with Machado they just kind of tossed her aside once she was inconvenient. And also, kind of as you said before, it doesn't seem like they're going to move forward with a de-Ba'athification type move. They're not going to completely remove the Venezuelan government. Now, look, we are 72 hours into this thing, and so a week from now, Rodriguez could be serious about her opposition. The Trump administration decides, you know what, we're not going to just let some other Chavez, take over again and again and again. We're just going to go in, we're going to clean house, and we're going to put whoever we want in charge. And I mean, that could be Juan Guaido for all we know, really. So we'll kind of see how this develops. But right now, it seems like they're at least trying to avoid some of the more disastrous policies that Bush implemented after going to war in Iraq.
What do you make of Trump threatening Colombia's Petro, and also, as antiwar.com is reporting, saying that Cuba is ready to fall? I mean, there's a lot of bluster going around right now.
Absolutely. Well, look, so when people were as soon as he named Marco Rubio his Secretary of State, I was concerned that we would end up in Venezuela. And people would ask me, why are we going to go to war in Venezuela? And I would say, I know this sounds ridiculous, but stick with me. There is a group of South Florida Republicans who want regime change in Cuba. They believe what is preventing them from getting their regime change in Cuba is the US or the Venezuela propping up the Cuban government. And there's like this symbiotic relationship, right, where Cuba has a fairly, I don't want to say like robust military, but well-trained soldiers. They have doctors and some other kinds of bureaucrats and professionals that are able to like go to Venezuela and help out the Venezuelan government. And then Venezuela is able to give Cuba resources, which Cuba lacks, being a tiny impoverished island. And so was kind of the relationship between those two countries. Rubio wanted regime change in Havana, but believed first you need a regime change in Caracas. And so with Maduro out, I think one of the main demands of Rodriguez is going to be you can't export any oil to Cuba, and Rubio is then going to push to topple that government. Now, it may not be a similar situation as we see here. I think we've seen the playbook in Cuba is to spark protest. I'm sure there's a far more substantial kind of CIA network of, assets in Cuba to be mobilized and things like that than there even was in Venezuela. And so I think they'll try to topple the Cuban government that way. And Trump is going to do kind of what we're seeing him do now with Iran, which is to say that if any protesters get killed, then we're going to take action. And certainly the Iranian government is cracking down on protesters. However, protesters are also trying to break into ammunition depots and things like that, and they are predictably being shot at, and some of them are being killed. And so you can see a similar thing playing out in Cuba, where protests get big, government cracks down, protesters attack back, then the government predictably kills the protesters, and now you have a situation where Trump is threatening to intervene on behalf of the protesters, right? Like that's kind of the the road I think we're going down with Cuba. With Colombia and Petro, I have to imagine this is just bluster, right? Like I know there is a new government in Colombia, and it's not the same as the government that signed on to like the one Colombia policy that was pushed by Biden for decades, or that became a major non-NATO U.S. ally. But Colombia does have an American paid for military. Colombia is a major non-NATO US ally. And just can't imagine that we would actually attack or try a regime change there. It would probably be more a similar situation to where we saw in uh Honduras and Argentina, where Trump tries to really put the levers on the scales of the next election to either threaten the Colombian people or bribe the Colombian people, like, hey, you'll get this nice $20 billion loan, or you face economic isolation, vote for the candidate of my choosing. I also find the threats against Mexico interesting, and maybe
I
the
was
most
just going to ask
problematic.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is where I do think Trump would try to use the US military. Maybe not against the Mexican government, but I mean, I don't want to rule anything out after this past weekend. But I do think the more likely thing to do would just be to essentially ignore the Mexican authorities, tell them they'll get shot at if they get in the way, and then go start killing people we think are in cartels.
So in terms of, you're involved with libertarian circles, which also gives you crossover with sort of conservative voices and even like MAGA, America First types. What have you made of the reaction on the right? There have been some voices on the right that have spoken out against the capture, or as I say, kidnapping of Maduro, such as Thomas Massey and also Marjorie Taylor Greene. But what have you seen with the reactions? Because it sounds like a lot of people are just falling in line and acting like this is the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I think it was really predictable. It's the same group of Republicans that are opposed to U.S. military aid to Israel that are opposed to what Trump did in Venezuela, because those are the group of Republicans that uphold principle over personality, that they really care about the views that they espouse when they're running on the campaign trail against regime change, against endless wars, against getting into foreign entanglements and spending unnecessary money on the military. We're not the world police force. We don't need to go around and liberate different countries or steal their oil. We just need to be concerned domestically. And so those Republicans and those people on the right, because a lot of them, I don't even know if they would like call themselves Republicans. They're like America firsters, right? Were good on this issue. And then you have people who like kind of the way I would divide MAGA in America first is the MAGA people are more Trumpers and the America firsters are, the people who actually believe in those values. And so, you have Thomas Massey, legitimate America firster, comes out and condemns this. You have Mike Lee, a MAGA guy, who comes out and says, well, this actually did follow the Constitution because we invaded Venezuela and then our troops were in danger. And so the Constitution says the commander in chief could then bomb that country. Of course, I mean, he can't be so stupid to not think through, but wouldn't the invasion itself then have been illegal? Like, how can we get our troops into Venezuela and then carry out constitutional defense of them? So of course that's just absolute garbage, and uh, really disappointing to see, but also predictable. And like I said, it's kind of divided along the exact line that I thought, where those who will stand up to Trump on Israel, Iran, are also opposed to this, where those who suddenly, maybe had some problems with what the US was doing in the Middle East under Biden in support for Israel, and then as soon as Trump took over, it's all fine and dandy. Those people are saying that this is great.
What are your biggest concerns moving forward? Because there's a lot of uncertainty at play, but what do you see as the worst case scenarios, and how can this escalate? How could this get worse? What are your primary concerns right now?
Yeah, I guess, I'll go with my selfish concerns first. That is as an American. And so there is, first of all, the quagmire effect, right? That we end up embroiled in long-term military conflict. Hundreds, if not thousands of American soldiers end up coming home dead. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands come home with PTSD or other injuries. And, that we suffer those consequences. But worse, at least with like Iraq or Afghanistan, that was the other side of the world, right? There is no easy way to get from Afghanistan or Iraq to the United States without flying on a US sponsored plane, right? Like the Iraqis and the Afghans who have come to the United States have come through the US government, not through migration, where I do think that there bypassing the dream utopian scenario that this is a peaceful transition of power and that Rodriguez is going to play ball with the Americans to a sufficient degree that they lift the sanctions on Venezuela, which I don't think will happen, then we're going to see economic instability, fighting, potentially civil war. Thousands, are not thousands, millions of Venezuelans fleeing the country, probably going to Brazil and Peru and Colombia first. But then, as we see, spillover effects, or as those governments can accommodate more migrants, they're either going to just cut off the social welfare programs and the migrants will start going north. Even if they don't necessarily settle in the United States, of course, large number of migrants in small Latin American countries are going to cause other economic problems and other people are going to migrate. And so over the next decade, I think we're going to see a mass migration moving north eventually to the United States. And then we're going to face another border crisis where even if you're pro-immigration, you certainly don't want to see a bunch of people displaced from their homes and then put on the dole in the United States of America. Like that's not a good thing to happen. This isn't like voluntary migration. This is going to be because of conflict and economic hardship. Additionally, Venezuela is interesting because the border is Amazon rainforest with Peru, with Brazil, with Colombia, with Guyana, which that could get really interesting too. There's a major territorial dispute between Venezuela and Guyana that involves significant oil reserves. And so if the Guyanese government thinks, oh, this is an opportunity to act and really seize that territory, then this could, have spillover effects there. But I'm just thinking of like drug trafficking is going to grow in Venezuela because of this, right? When the Venezuelan government doesn't have its established relationship with the Colombians and the Peruvians and the Brazilians over, where we're monitoring and how we're making sure that the Colombian and the Peruvian coca producers aren't bringing cocaine over the Venezuelan border, smuggling it through the rainforest. And you're right, like all this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. And again, unlike with Afghanistan, where a lot of that opium was going to Iran and Pakistan and Russia and China, this is going to be coming to the United States of America, right? Like this is in our own hemisphere. And so all the bad things that happened from Iraq, we were really isolated from all of them, not having to deal with our soldiers and the Afghanis and the Iraqis that we chose to bring to the United States. Where here it's going to be a completely different scenario. So, as an American, I think over the next decade, this is going to be a massive catastrophe for the homeland, not just our soldiers. And of course, most importantly, right, the Venezuelan people here. Um, they are going to suffer. And it's hard to predict what the political future is like right now in Venezuela. I think, we're going to probably have to wait weeks or months to really see how the Venezuelan people what government they want, what different power factions right now are behind the scenes vying for power, what Rodriguez does, how the Americans react. But I don't think Trump threatened to bomb the country again. I think that happens, right? Like I don't think the US military operations are done. I don't think the strikes are done. And I think we're going to see just internal chaos on
Can you
Venezuela
elaborate on that?
compounding the problem.
So because like part of me wants to believe that this was almost like some spectacle for Trump just to distract the public from whatever Epstein or that sounds dumb, but like it's wishful thinking on my part. Why do you think there's going to be a second strike or another military operation?
Well, because Trump's idea of what's going to happen in Venezuela is an absolute fantasy, right? Like, even in the best scenarios of transitions of power, right, you occasionally have a January 6th or something like that. And this isn't a peaceful transition of power. The president got kidnapped. And so I would assume that behind the scenes in Venezuela, even if Rodriguez played no role in it at all, right? Like if her hands are completely clean, all of her political rivals are talking about, well, what if she's not? And maybe they don't really care either way and they want to take power. And so they're going to start to put that rumor out there. And, um, I think you're going to see instability in Venezuela, which Trump is going to try to solve the problems in waves of airstrikes, right? Like if you listen to his address and what he talks about as being his foreign policy achievements, it's the assassination of Soleimani in 2020. It's the killing of Baghdadi during the Baghdadi raid in Syria, and then the Operation Midnight Hammer, the strikes on Iran this summer. And Trump thinks that those resolved problems. But today, Syria is ruled by Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, a veteran of al-Qaeda in Iraq and a jihadist. The killing of Soleimani, well, you had a bomb Iran 4 years later. So how did that resolve any problems or bring peace to the Middle East? And Trump is saying that Operation Midnight Hammer solved the Iran crisis, but literally 48 hours before he said that, Netanyahu was in the United States telling Donald Trump that if he didn't bomb Iran again, then Iran was going to have a massive missile and nuclear program. So obviously that didn't resolve the problem, but Donald Trump is going to believe that, oh, just one more round of strikes is going to solve the problem. And so I think that's the path he's going down because that's what he's done in the past.
What do you make of his "We are in Venezuela now and we're going to stay" comments? I know you wrote a whole article about this for Anti-War. It's like I said, that's the weirdest part to me because it's like I just it goes against everything his base claimed to have wanted. I mean, he's
Right.
talking about. I mean, that would be an occupation, wouldn't it?
Right. I think the Trumpers are trying to interpret that as a Trumpian way of saying that we control Venezuela and not necessarily that we are currently like occupying the president's office and dictating orders or something like that. I do wonder if that was a little bit more of a veiled statement of the truth than we might imagine. To put hundreds of American soldiers on the ground and conduct the operations that we conducted to seize Maduro, there has to be somewhere in Venezuela a sizable U.S. covert ground presence. And I do wonder if, maybe the CIA has a lot more influence in Venezuela right now than we publicly know about. And Trump's kind of alluding to that somewhere the US and the chain of commands is dictating orders that are going out, or at least Trump believes that's what's happening. I'm really trying to get my head around it. I guess I think the most reasonable explanation is Trump and his administration cut a deal with Rodriguez. And I did see some reporting, I believe in the Telegraph, that the UAE actually brokered this and that Trump views her as his woman in charge now. And he's kind of looking at that as we are in control or she is in control. And if she doesn't do what we want, at that point he would go in with another wave of bombing, take her out, and then put boots on the ground to control the country.
Is there anything I've missed so far? I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about oil right now. I think even Representative Massey has brought that up, that there's an oil grab element to this. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so this is just so stupid that it's hard to like fathom that. And look, Maduro and Trump said that Maduro was willing to work on the oil.
Right.
And even if, let's say, that we take over the country and we get a far better deal on that oil than we would have under what Maduro was offering, you do have to look at it. And I have to imagine that the oil companies will have had to look at this too, where Maduro's an established figure who brings stability and control over the country, right? And so if you're having to pay Venezuela a little bit more, you are paying for somebody who you could control, who and who's able to control the country, which would all be really important. Where here, you're rolling the dice like you did in Iraq, and Iraq hasn't proven to be like a big boon for the US oil industry. And so my assumption would be that oil wasn't the cause of Trump going to war in Venezuela. Maybe, it's a selling point to him when, Rubio and others are saying, look, we're going to take the profits from these oil. But I can't imagine that like the oil lobby was really arguing that removing Maduro was preferable to accepting Maduro's offer from before, if that made sense.
Yeah, what I was gonna say was yeah, the oil thing almost seems distractionary when you have people like JD Vance going on about it's our oil, it's our, and I think it was Massey that said it's not American oil, it's Venezuelan oil. You know,
Right. It,
I don't know.
it
Yeah.
it's not a good argument. I don't, you know why I mean? I think even Americans would not view that as their oil. Even in the most generous interpretation, I think Americans have enough kind of antagonism towards the big oil companies that, right, like it's not our oil. Maybe you're saying it's Exxon's oil or something like that, right? But you're not really arguing that it's like mine in your oil or you know what I mean in that sense. So I don't think it passes. And like you said, it just seems more like a distraction propaganda point, right? And I think it's going to be kind of effective in baiting the Democrats into attacking a less important point in all of this. But again, I really think the most important thing is about Cuba. at least to Marco Rubio, who I do believe is responsible for driving this policy. Although I did see a report, I think it was in the New York Times, that said Stephen Miller was at least as vocal of an advocate for this as Rubio was.
Can you speak more to that, Rubio, and that South Florida connection? Is there more you like? Can you add more color to that to for my listeners that are unfamiliar?
Yeah, so I mean, South Florida is the home to, first of all, a lot of Cuban-Americans, but just a lot of people who are particularly exiles from different Latin American countries. And this has created like a large Republican base in South Florida that advocates for kind of the Cold World War view of Latin America, that the communist countries are a problem, which look, I'm a libertarian, right? And I don't have any problem with any other country in the world being communist. Not my business, not my government's business, and certainly not my government's military's business, right? Like, if some private American citizen wants to go to Venezuela and try to convince them that Ludwig von Mises is a better, economic person to follow than Karl Marx, then all the power to them. But other than that, I don't think we should have any involvement in if another country is communist. But these people, and a lot of them, right, I think it's as much for their like own personal kind of preferences. Like, they liked the old governments that were either just removed through election or popular overthrow than the current communist governments. And so, or it's financial, right? The communists took over, they stole their family's land or money, or exiled their family, or even did something really actually horrific to their family members. But now they want to use the US government to overthrow their home governments in order to install a government that they want in their country, right? And that's honestly the one of my biggest oppositions to migration in the US is you now have large constituents who are American voters who are advocating for policies to specifically benefit another country, right? This isn't about the United States. This is Marco Rubio wanting Cuba to be a different place than it is now. And he's now Secretary of State. This is a real problem. And it's compounded by the fact that the American media exploits these people, right? And so, now we're going to see, right, like they're going to go to Miami, they're going to see some Venezuelan exiles, or second generation Venezuelan Americans, waving Venezuelan flags and celebrating the downfall of Maduro. And they're going to interview those people and present them as experts on the situation when they say, oh, Maduro is horrible, and now the US is going to get rich. And so this is like kind of that community that Marco Rubio comes from.
Another area I wanted to cover with you, and I don't put much credence into it, I think it's being overstated, is people are saying this is all about Israel, I guess, or the Zionist influence. I mean, I'm as critical of Israel and things like APAC, pro-Israel affinity groups as anyone else, but I also don't know that all roads always lead to Israel when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, especially in like the case of Latin America.
Yeah, so I guess to make the case for it first, because
Okay.
I do agree with you ultimately, but the evidence that people are pointing to is immediately before it even happens, Trump is meeting with Netanyahu. And so certainly this would have been on his mind as he's meeting with Netanyahu. And the Israelis have long argued that Maduro in particular is a problem for them because they do business with Hezbollah and they do business with Iran. The business with Iran in particular is a direct result of the US sanctioning those two governments and then basically having no other trading partners. And so, right, like there's not a good way to get from Iran to Venezuela. You have to go out the Persian Gulf, down around Africa, and then up to the northern half of South America, right? Like, that's not in any way a reasonable trading route. And there are billions of people much closer to Iran for them to trade with, but US sanctions made that impossible. And for a long time, the US enforced sanctions by saying that, well, if you do sanctions with a sanctioned country, then you're also going to be sanctioned. Well, Venezuela and Iran were already sanctioned. And so if they trade with each other, there's essentially no repercussions from that, right? Because they can't be double sanctioned. Trump started seizing the oil tankers. I think that was a part of it. So Israel, like, does have some policy interest in Latin America, claiming that Hezbollah ties and Iranian trade with Venezuela. And then immediately after the raid, Netanyahu tweets out that this is a great thing. And the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said that this was a great thing for Israel. And so some people are saying that Israel wanted this either as to kind of create distraction from Gaza as Netanyahu is ramping up and getting ready to go there. Some people are saying that this was an attempt to basically kick Afghanistan syndrome, a reference to Vietnam syndrome, where Americans become war weary after a long-term quagmire that was an absolute failure. And there's an idea that the Gulf War, the very rapid success there, the removal of the Iraqi army from Kuwait at a very low cost to the Americans, uh set the stage for the US to then, like, bomb Central Europe during the Clinton years or go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so they're saying that this could be a setup for a larger war against Iran. We had this great success at taking out Maduro, reshaping the country. We could go and do the same thing with the Ayatollah now. um However, I think that this again is more South Florida than Tel Aviv, right? Like that's where I think this policy was directed from. I don't think Netanyahu has any problems with it. I'm not sure. I guess if I were Netanyahu, I would be at least a little bit concerned that if this turns into a quagmire, it's going to divert American resources from the Middle East to the Caribbean. And that wouldn't necessarily be a good thing for him, right? Like if we end up having to bomb Venezuela every single week, is Trump going to be willing to also go and bomb Iran on behalf of Tel Aviv? If Venezuela is able to start lobbing some missiles at American ships out in the Caribbean, and the U.S. has to redeploy some of its THAAD, Patriot, SM-6 interceptors from the Middle East to the Caribbean, that can't be a good thing for Israel. And that has to be something that Netanyahu considered. I think his praise for the move and lack of opposition to it probably just amounts to him thinking this won't go catastrophic. And it's best to always praise Donald Trump. That's the way you stay on his good side.
Um, just a few more things. What do you think about the rationale that's been used for this? I mean, Trump is like citing a 1934 gun law or whatever to go after Maduro, and then we have to take down the narco-terrorism. I mean, I know you try to sound very not neutral because you obviously come from a libertarian perspective, but you try to call it down the middle, like very without like too much emotion. But like it's hard for me not to show emotion, thinking like, wow, this is even this isn't like the rollout to the Iraq War where there was like a big push. Like he just kind of went in, said like, well, narco-terrorism, and got Maduro and kidnapped him. And he like the question of legality and all this stuff, the Constitution just thrown out the window. Like there's not even like the rationale was flimsy to begin with. Like, what are we to make of this?
Right. And this isn't to endorse in any way Bush's propaganda leading up to the Iraq War, but at least it kind of saying it made sense seems like an overstatement, but let me explain. Trump is saying that every single ship that he's blown up in the Caribbean was going to kill 25,000 Americans. He's blown up 30 ships and 75,000 Americans died of drug overdoses last year. Right. And so, like, obviously the numbers just don't add up. And any person who thinks about it for over 3 seconds understands that this isn't like a serious statement. Um, Another thing is, I think Americans know largely because Trump has been saying it for a long time, that the fentanyl comes over the Mexican border, and it's the fentanyl that's really killing Americans, and I think what Americans see as an unacceptable way. Not that Americans are okay when somebody develops a cocaine habit, but I do think a lot of Americans point to personal responsibility. And even with heroin, I think to some extent they see it that way too, where with fentanyl, it's such a low amount of the drug, people are actually accidentally killing themselves, where not that people intentionally kill them, like there are accidental heroin overdoses, but it's I think people just see the fentanyl as being such a small amount that's like kind of a uniquely problematic thing where you're you're not knowingly killing yourself in the same way as with other drugs. And that's, I guess, my interpretation of how people kind of look at it and why they see fentanyl as being so evil. And they know that that's coming from China through Mexico and not from Venezuela. Like that, again, Venezuela isn't on that map. So I don't think people ever believe that there's, I mean, the indictment claiming that he's the leader of our cartel, that's a little bit at least harder to disprove, and people might believe that to some degree. I I I think Iraq and Syria and Libya have kind of conditioned the American people not to believe our leader when they say we're going to go into a country and take the oil. It hasn't panned out anywhere. I don't think people believe any of the propaganda, yet Trump did it anyway. Is quite astonishing. And
Well, there
as you
just
say,
there
the
wasn't even that much of a buildup for it. He just kind of went in and did it. Like, and you either, I mean,
well,
we were
there
like
was and there
prepped.
wasn't,
Well,
right?
there was a little bit of prep propaganda,
But
but
because look, like early in his administration, think this was by March, they were claiming that Maduro was a narco-terrorist and the leader of our cartel. I think it was in July that they actually named Cartel de los Soles and TDA as being foreign terrorist organizations. And then Trump authorized lethal CIA involvement in Venezuela. Then he started bombing the drug boats. And so it wasn't like Bush-esque, right? Where people were going to the press every day to hear the latest news about how we know Saddam was working with the terrorists or buildings of weapons of mass destruction, right? The vice president wasn't on TV talking about this, but it was happening. Like kinetically, it was going on. And I've certainly been covering it the entire time. Like, I've been very concerned about this from day one, and all of these steps ratcheting it up. I was like, this is a build up to war. This is a build up to war. I guess I didn't think they were just going to go and kidnap Maduro, certainly not successfully in the middle of the night, but um I think this is just like kind of the next escalation on the path to making Venezuela the next Iraq.
do you think there's consequences from like, I mean, I haven't listened to what Judge Andrew Napolitano has said about this, but I assume he would say that this is unconstitutional or this is, I mean, does this have constitutional consequences is really what I want to ask you.
Certainly. So I guess, there's 2 points to make. The first is for people who will say, when you say this was a clear unconstitutional war, they'll say, well, we didn't declare war for Iraq and or Afghanistan, but there was an authorization of use of military force. Obama illegally invaded and bombed Syria. Congress was going to vote against that. Libya, the same thing. Biden bombed Yemen. Trump already. So the erosion of constitutional war powers has been going on for some time, but this you know, maybe is such a flagrant violation of constitutional war powers. When it happened, I did wonder if maybe, in a 100 years from now, when historians are writing history books about the decline of the American empire, if this is where they point to and say, this is where America officially left like its constitutional system. Like the First Amendment, depending on how you look at it, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, like so many of our rights in the Bill of Rights have already been shredded, and constitutional war powers and limitations have already been shredded. But that the president basically said it would have been inconvenient to inform Congress and they might have leaked it. And so we could go to war whenever we want, is got to be the most flagrant violation of the Constitution uh in history. And certainly a precedent set that any president now no longer needs to bother with Congress in any act of foreign policy. We are at war 100% of the time. We are a warfare state. And so the president is essentially acting as commander in chief 24/7 with an open war field that includes the globe.
What do you want to say to listeners that I have on both the left and the right that are opposed to this? And what are you hoping with regards to people making noise against, uh, a possible? Well, at this point, I think the thing that everyone's worried about is there going to be a second wave, more strikes? Are they going to try to kill Rodriguez? Is there going to be a regime change?
Right. I think the most important thing that could happen on the American right in response to this is maybe this is what fractures the Republican Party. Maybe the people who have been like kind of too afraid of the anti-Semitism claim to really come out against Trump's foreign policy when it comes to Israel. You don't have this here, right? Like, so I don't know. I think that this may really split MAGA from the America First movement, and hopefully, that moves the right in a better direction and doesn't just marginalize America First, or some body that I would really disagree with, like a Nick Fuentes, would end up being like the thought leader of America First following a split. So on the like American left, I think it's really important for everybody to remember who the Democrats are. And while they may say some really good things in the coming days, uh, they are going to flip back on this issue. And so just I guess be very careful with the lights of like Chris Coons and Chuck Schumer, who are going to sound really good in response, not really good, better than normal in response to this, but they're really just war makers and playing politics. And so like, pay attention to who the true like anti-interventionist, anti-war voices
Well,
are on the
it's
left, and
not to
not
interrupt
fall
you,
for
but
like, yeah.
it's like I think a lot of Democrats, their issue isn't the intervention itself. It's, well, you didn't get congressional approval, you know? So,
Right, which look does have some importance, but
no, of
the
course, yeah.
reason the reason they're saying that is because if Joe Biden had done it, they would have supported it. And they really do want the door to be open for somebody on their side of the aisle to do something like this. And so, they're finding like a marginal issue to complain about in order to not have to take a real stand on it. And that's going to be like a good bellwether for people as far as if this is somebody you should actually trust and listen to, or if this is just somebody to try to score political points, even though they're on your side of this issue.
Before we close out, so I want to ask you this, being that you're um, from the libertarian end of things. I see a lot of, I think there's an attempt by certain elements of MAGA to try to say, well, we are the true anti-interventionists and don't believe these people that write for antiwar.com. Like I saw Matt Walsh say today, well, I'm a true anti-interventionist, and anti-interventionism means we're going to dominate the Western Hemisphere. So I'm fine with dominating the Western Hemisphere. Anti-interventionism just means we don't have wars in the Middle East. Now, you and I think that's bullshit, right? But I feel like the play being made is, well, the forever wars in the Middle East were bad, but invading all of Latin America or taking Greenland or I don't know, going to war with Canada is good because it's within our sphere of influence. And I think, beyond the fact that I think that's insane, I think this is all very foolhardy and hubristic. And even with Maduro was willing to play ball with Trump. Like, this was all unnecessary. That's my
Yeah.
view. But I wanted you to speak to that. Do you think I'm on point with that criticism?
No, I definitely think that you're on point with your criticism, and it shows a real lack of understanding, or I guess, maybe they do understand, and this is just, their political spinning or whatever, but maybe it shows a lack of like real understanding of why the anti-interventionist point is important. Is not to score points on Obama when he's trying to take the US into an illegal and unjustified war in Syria on behalf of Al Qaeda. It's because you understand that the implications from war are absolutely catastrophic, not only on the country that's being victimized, but also on the perpetrating country, at least for its people. And again, this like it. I would hate to say so, like recommend this, but if the U.S. has to wage a regime change war, it would be better for the American people for that to happen in Afghanistan than in Venezuela, right? Like if you were going to do it, at least if it's in Afghanistan, we are more exempt from the regional implications of it than we would be if it's in our own hemisphere. So Matt Walsh pretending like this is a good thing because it's close by, it's actually worse for Americans. It's in no way better. And the idea that domination is equal to peace is simply absurd. The path of obtaining that domination is going to create so much instability that it ensures you never have peace, not the opposite.
I do think though it shows that these Matt Walsh figures and these, I call them the fake pretenders that claim to be supporters of the old republic, which is what America used to be. It's they're having to deal with the fact that younger people uh, aren't buying into the interventionist lies anymore and the warmongering. And I think they're trying to like reorient younger people back into the fold of being interventionists. I don't know if you also do you see a little bit of that like with
Oh
the
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, right. They they're trying to act as shepherds, right? Like when a
right.
few of the sheep stray from the flock,
Sheepdogging, yeah.
they have to go and they got to get them back. And so they know that they're headed towards the slaughterhouse, right? And so you got to lie to them and make it sound like they're not. Oh no, we're going to the nice barn right next to the slaughterhouse, and that's kind of the goal here, right? Is to just drive to drive them in the right direction to keep them from straying too far. It's not working, and that is kind of really highlighted by the fact that Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes are some of the most popular figures on the right now. And, people I agree with, like Dave Smith, are absolutely exploding in popularity. And I think that's fantastic. Obviously, the right could go in a really, really dangerous direction whenever they're like, one thing I've realized is that chaos kind of opens the door for like opportunity and to create something new and better, but also to go in a really, really dangerous direction. And so while I think political chaos on the right is good, it also, comes with like me feeling a lot of responsibility to constantly speak out on these issues and to try to address the American right and make sure that they don't fall into kind of the hatred of Nick Fuentes, who I think has some really problematic views, even though I agree with him on foreign policy, largely, or Israel. I don't know how I don't pay that close enough attention to Nick to know what he said about the capture of Maduro, but I do see a lot of foreign policy issues where we are in agreement, but even with me and him agreeing on my most important issues, I don't want him to become a popular thought figure on the right because of how horrific his views in other categories are.
Last thing here, and I just want to reiterate this point because I think that for me, the big takeaway in all of this was people forget Maduro offered U.S. access to Venezuelan oil in
Yeah.
exchange for security guarantees and a reduction in sanctions, and Trump rejected it. I mean, I, I mean, it really is. This is all mind-boggling to me. It's like something out of a Keystone Cops. Like, I mean, the operation was extremely successful. No one can deny that. But we didn't even need to do this. That's what's so mind-boggling to me. I don't know. That's my thoughts in closing. Like, this is just, it's the craziness of empire. But I want to get your closing thoughts. What are yours?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem the operation was a striking military success, which I do like, that's not a moral statement or support statement, just as far as it goes, that a Pete Hegseth operated Department of War was able to plan and conduct that. It is shocking to me. And I do still wonder if there is like more to this story that we're not learning. Like maybe the security force was essentially given stand down orders to let them take Maduro, and the US went in and shot them all anyway, or something like that. Because it is absolutely insane that they would have been able to get through Maduro's security force before he was getting to that safe room if they were in any way putting up any kind of resistance. It's just absolutely striking. So I mean, there's a lot of takeaways from all this. There's a lot I could break down, try to get into, but I think that's one of my last thoughts there.
You said there's a lot of takeaways. Is there like anyone in specific that you think people need to really hone in on?
Just I think the one thing I'm learning in the second Trump administration is he's not bluffing, right? Like, and if this was in the New York Times, that a part of what prompted Trump to order the capture of Maduro was that Maduro was like dancing around Caracas and like making these public speeches and really happy and encouraging the Venezuelan people. And the White House interpreted that as Maduro calling Trump's bluff. And to show he wasn't bluffing, he'd ordered the military attack. And if that's the case, then we have to not. And look, we've seen this with Nigeria now, where out of nowhere on Christmas Day, Trump attacks Nigeria. We saw it with bombing Iran, even if it was a one-off, going to war with the Houthis back in March. That Trump is very serious about the threats he makes. And so if I were in Bogota, Havana, Mexico City, Tehran, Pyongyang, Beijing, or Moscow, maybe not Moscow, but even maybe Beijing, I would be very concerned about what Donald Trump is doing. Not that he's necessarily going to go in and try to arrest Xi, but that he is not playing around, is willing to use the military to back up his over-the-top statements.
Well, I want to thank you again, Kyle, for coming on Parallax Views. How can my listeners keep up with your work, social media, YouTube, all that?
I do a ton of stuff. So the easiest place to follow, I post all my articles, all my shows on my X account at Kyle Anzalone_. Best place to follow me. I do two shows, Conflicts of Interest and the Kyle Anzalone Show. And I write articles at antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute, and judgenap.com.
And thank you again, Kyle Anzalone.
Thank you.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers' credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/parallaxviews, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing this like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.